Erev Tov to everybody. It's good to see everybody. Thank you for coming on. It's most appreciated. I know that it's not such an easy time with Pesach around the corner. And it's wonderful to see Rivka and Hamakom Yinachim Utach B'toch Sha'ar Avelei Tzion B'Yushalayim. Rivka lost her dear husband last week. And so our thoughts are with you. And it's good to see my good friend Mitch. Wow, it's wonderful to see you. And Bracha is on, and Bracha is the daughter of Leah Bat Eliezer. And we wanted to mention Leah Bat Eliezer's yahrzeit, and the shiur in part is dedicated to her. Bracha, it's wonderful to have you on the Zoom this evening. And I see Ronnie is on, so wow, this is a great kavod, great, and Hal and Ellie and my Tova. And hi Sue Rudnick is on. My dear, dear friend Gabriella is on. And Judy is on, and Betty. It's just wonderful to have everybody on. And those who—
Rabbi, you remember, you're
Yes, Mitch,
You're
please.
reminding me of my youth you're reminding me of Romper Room when I was young.
Right.
On Romper Room, she always said that. I see Betty and I see this one.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And I want to welcome Denny's I see on. Wow, there's a very wonderful group. And I see Shabi. Shabi, how are you doing? All those Sfarim behind you.
It's good to see you. It's good to be back.
Shabala, where are you?
I'm in my apartment. My dad has a auction house specializing in rare Judaica. So I grew up with, Sfarim on every wall of the apartment. So
right. And Shabi, you've been spending time in Poland, right?
Yes, I was on the Poland-Ukraine border to help out in any way I can. I was there over Purim a few days after, and I got back about a week ago. So it was a very intense trip, very difficult trip, but I'm glad I did it, and I was able to help in some very small way.
Just give us 2 minutes of an experience, Shabi, if you don't mind.
Sure. I guess one experience that definitely stuck out is I was in Karchova, which is a border town right next to Ukraine, about 2 minutes away from Ukraine, actually. And there was a big refugee center there with really thousands of refugees coming in and out every single day. More and more have actually come in as the situation has deteriorated. And I met, by happenstance, a Jewish family. The father spoke a little broken Hebrew, but they were a Jewish family. They'd been stuck in the center for a good week. And I was able to drive them away from the refugee center and into Krakow, which was about 3 hours away. And when I asked them, it was now 3 a.m. I said, "Where are you going now?" And they said, "Well, we'll just sleep in the train station and wait for the next train to Vienna." And of course, we couldn't let that happen. They have a 4-year-old daughter, a 6-year-old daughter. So right then and there, we got them, a hotel room for as many nights as they needed. And the moment that really, will stay imparted within my brain for a while is this, big macho dad, this Eastern European tough guy. He starts breaking down and he hugs us and he says, "For the past month, all of my daughters known have been taking. People have taken their lives from them. People have taken their school and their friends. And you guys are one of the first in a while to be givers." And we didn't even do that much. We basically just drove them and got them a hotel room. You don't have to be wealthy and you don't have to be brave. It's a very easy thing to do. And the fact that we were able to make a difference and to make an impact on that way was really, really moving. And it's a drop in the bucket because there are obviously millions of those types of stories and millions of those refugees. But the fact that I was able to help in even just a small way was very, very meaningful. So
Shabi is an unbelievable unbelievable person, one of my favorite people. And from the time I met Shabi years ago, he just touched my heart, Shabi, and
Thank you.
God should bless you, Shabi. Just
Amen.
continue doing the beautiful things that you
Thank
do.
you.
So we're going to spend about an hour together. It's about 8 to 10, so we'll go no longer than 9 o'clock, 9:10. This Pesach is an unusual Pesach because of the darkness that's all around us. And for me, Pesach, the Seder, was and is still so centered around Israel. And I'm thinking of recent days, Be'er Sheva, Chadera, Bnei Brak, Neve Daniel, and Tel Aviv. Our children, Dov and Shandy, and their two children, Moshe and Salman, they literally sent us the video as the Tel Aviv attack was unfolding, because they live right there, right on Dizengoff, just a block or two away. And you could hear in the background the sirens as the ambulances were looking and running to try to save life. And these are very difficult times for Medinat Israel, the Eretz Israel. But in the same breath, we have in our Ruach, we have within our Jewish framework a spirit of stepping back to make room for others, even in times of our personal need. And so the person whose heart is broken is one who can also feel the broken hearts of others. And so this Pesach, I'm thinking about Ukraine. I'm thinking about Mariupol, where it is said tens of thousands of civilians were murdered. Bucha, the images of corpses with hands bound and bullets through the head, tear at our hearts. And what I'd like to do is something I believe I've never, ever done in all my years of the rabbinate, certainly to the extent that I'm about ready to present. And that is bringing universal responsibilities into the Seder ritual. In the past, think about the Soviet Jewry movement, there was new ritual written, as there was the matzah of hope. And through the years, this is the 20th anniversary of the Park Hotel massacre in Netanya, exactly 20 years ago. Israel was so central to all of us. But Ukraine weighs heavily, I believe, on all of us. And we have a special responsibility to bring its message along with the Israel that we love into our Seder. And so what we've developed is something that I'm calling 4 cups, bringing Ukraine into the Seder ritual. It's hard for me to begin without a nigun, and this is a nigun with the words of Reb Levi Yitzhak Badichev, and it's called Do, Do, Do. You, you, you. And so bracha with your ima in mind, Leah Bat Eliezer. This is the nigun for Do, Do, Do. Ribono shel olam, ich will dir adu de la spielen. Ribono shel olam, ich will dir adu Dilla zingin, Ana emta acha, do, ana lo emta acha. Do, azesi is good. Do, chalilani ish do. Beloved God, there's only you. Do, only you. Do, do. Is the informal Yiddish second person, and it means you. And the Berditchev, even in the most difficult times, he would seek out God, and he would say, Maladu, above you, Matadu, beneath, below you, God, Mizrachdu, to the east, to the west, to the north, to the south. Efo shani holech, vu ich gei, only you. Vu ich steh, where I stand, only you. In mein cup, in mein hearts, in my head and in my heart, only you. And some people are able, and I'm one of them, to take comfort in the darkest moments, feeling that presence. Beloved God, there's only you. Atahareyat, do, only you. And so we begin. Our first cup we're going to call Kos Empati, which means the empathetic cup. And so here's the suggestion for that first cup. As the Seder begins, maybe we should consider for a moment pausing in front of everyone who's at the Seder and pour in a cup of water to recall the role that Miriam played in the Exodus story. The idea of filling a cup of water in honor of Miriam goes back more than 30 years, and it was introduced, I believe, by a Chavurah, a Rosh Chodesh women's group in the Boston area in 1989. I have seen cups of Miriam near the cups of Elijah at the Seder, but they're generally filled with wine. In many ways, it's more appropriate, and this is the way it was introduced, that it be filled with water. After all, Miriam is associated with water. It was Miriam who watched over her brother Moshe when he was placed in the Or, when he was placed in the pond, in the pool of water. And it was Miriam who sang the song of the sea. In fact, every day after I say the Az Yashir Moshe, I add the sentence, Vatikach Miriam Hanaviyah, Achot Aharon et Atof biyada, Vatetzena kol anashim achareha betupim ubimcholot. And she calls out, does Miriam, and she calls out, Shiru Lashem ki ga'o ga'a, sus v'rochbo rama vayam. She sings at the sea. And the well in the desert was called Miriam's well. That's the well whose water nourished Am Yisrael. And we're told in Sefer Bamidbar that when Miriam died, suddenly the water of the well stopped producing. And so Miriam is associated with water, and she plays a central position in the Exodus story. And that really is the base of the idea of Miriam's cup of water. Now, water, as we all know, is foundational. We're born when the amniotic fluid breaks. Our bodies, I'm talking to Ruby now, our bodies must be hydrated. I'm talking to myself, letting you listen. It's so important to drink. And our bodies are composed mostly of water. I remember back in 1961, a couple of years ago, when I studied at Yeshivat Kerem B'Yavne in Israel. Israel was only 13 years old. And we went to Stone, which is near the Dead Sea. And you saw little faucets of water. And there were Hebrew signs that said, please don't let any of the water drip. When you close the faucet, close it tight. And all over they had signs that speak to the truth of the importance of water. And the signs said, Mayim Chayim, water is life. And what I'm suggesting as we begin this study is that pouring a cup of water so central to life and to Miriam's involvement in the Exodus could stir us this Seder to empathize with our sisters and brothers in Ukraine. We have all read countless narratives about Ukrainians who are desperate for water. We've seen the narratives now of the horrific rapes taking place in Mariupol, what happened in Bucha. But I've read narratives about thousands of people denied water. And sometimes they're forced to collect water from rusted pipes. At other times, they're so thirsty, they do something they shouldn't do. They gather water from the puddles of rainwater. And as we pour the water, we hope to do this at our Seder, to set the framework. This is a moment to feel for what's happening in Ukraine and to declare that your pain is our pain, your suffering is ours, and only when you'll be free will we be free. And so, pouring Miriam's water to begin our Seders may evoke this feeling of interconnectedness. Cup 2, and there are only 4 cups that we're going to be talking about. Cup 2, I call Kos She'elah, the cup of questions, Kos She'elah. And this relates to the second cup that we pour. In the Seder, of course, there's the first cup of the Kiddush, but the second cup is a cup that we pour before we begin the Maggid, story. And when we begin the Maggid story, when we pour the cup, we recite, Ha Lachma Ahanya. This is the bread of affliction. Ha Lachma Ahanya. Diachalu avatana ve'imatanu ve'ara dimitzrayim. That our mothers and fathers ate in Egypt. And we say, Kol dichvin, kol ditzrich, yete v'yivsach. This is the bread of affliction. And one of the signs of freedom is that we have the ownership not only to receive, but to give. And so we say, let the poor, those without food, let the needy be welcome to come into our home. And so we say, and others sing this paragraph. At our Seder, everyone has different customs. We actually lift the matzah and everyone reaches out to touch the matzah. This is the bread of affliction. We invite one and all. And so the suggestion of how, on some level, to slightly, because of what's unfolding, to alter the meaning of the second cup. Maybe when finishing this paragraph, just before we recite the Manishtana, the famous 4 questions, maybe we should do something we normally do not do. And that is open the door. I've always wondered about this. At the Seder, we open the door after the meal when there's no more food on the table. Well, shouldn't we be opening the door before the meal when the food is on the table? And after we've said, let all the hungry come in, symbolically open the door as our gesture to say that, in fact, everyone is welcome. And at that point, here's the suggestion related to the second cup. Maybe when we open the door, we should open the door and ask questions. And we should ask questions like, are we really allowing everyone in? More broadly, are we opening the door, doing the maximum we can for Ukraine? You know, central to the Magid, to the telling of the story, is the asking of questions, something that our dear Reb Stephen spoke about this Shabbat Hagadol. And the Magid is full of questions. Maybe that's why at the end of the Seder, we end the Seder with the Chad Gadya, the story about the one kid, which is a puzzling, yet a playful yet puzzling song, inspiring questions. And note the relationship between Magid and Chad Gadya. There are 2 ways to tell the story. One is a frontal way, but as good teachers know, the best way to tell a story is to ask the question. Vanakasha kemen nishtarbin, nobody has died from a question. Do you know when we cease growing? When nobody's asking questions. If we ask questions and then we find answers, students who are pushed to find answers, and we're all students, can establish ownership over the idea that it's being presented. It's not being presented from an external, but it becomes part of the internal selves of each of us. And so the Magid is a time to ask questions. After we pour that second cup and we've said, let all those who are hungry come in, why not open the door this year and ask, are we doing enough to open the door? Here are some questions I think that could be discussed at the Seder. Is America doing enough to help Ukraine? Is Israel doing enough to help Ukraine? Israel's been put in a very, very tough position. As Natan Sharansky brilliantly wrote in the Wall Street Journal, Israel is in a weak position because America is stepping out of the Middle East and allowing the Russians to come in. And with the Iranians near the Golan Heights, it's the Russians who are stopping the Iranians from retaliating and allowing Israel, as has now become public, to hit Iranian military bases almost every night. So Israel desperately needs Russia, but still there's a question being asked Israel, given that reality. Is Israel doing enough? And that's something to be discussed. On the one hand, as Shabi was near Ukraine, Israel has set up a field hospital in Sheba There's no other field hospital from any other country in the Ukraine. On the other hand, one wonders, has Israel done enough? A fair question to ask, especially in front of young people who are asking these questions, and we should prepare ourselves. Are we doing enough? Or let me ask a piercing question. Even as we are in awe of Russian citizenry who protest against Putin, and they could be thrown into prison for years, is the average Russian doing enough to seek out the truth? In my contacts with people who know, they say, sure, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter has been cut, but the word that I'm getting is that any Russian citizen who wants to find out the truth could find the truth, especially in our era. Even during the Soviet Jewry movement, when the Soviet Union was cut off from the rest of the world, many Soviets were listening to the Voice of America, to the VOA, and they got the truth. That's how the dissident movement, not only the Jewish dissident movement started, but other movements. And so this is the second kos. It's the kos of She'elah. It's the cup of asking questions. When I was a kid and I would ask hard questions, sometimes my Rebbes who meant well would stop me. No, the way it should be is the more questions you ask, the better. What's the story they tell about the Nobel Prize winner, Isaac Rabi? They asked him how he was fortunate enough to win the Nobel Prize, and he responded, well, my friends, when they got home from school, their parents asked, well, did you learn something today? And he said, when I came home from school, my parents would ask, Isaac, Yitzhak, did you ask a good question today? Did you ask a good question today? And the very word magid comes from the word gid, the sinews that are part of the human frame. A granddaughter, she is in medical school. She says, Abba, I'm in awe of God's creation of the human body that she's learning. Magid, when you look at the sinews and the bones and the nerves, one looks up and in wonderment, in amazement, and is asking questions. Kos she'elah. A third kos, we're moving rather quickly. The third kos I'd like to call Kos Olami, the universal cup. Follow me for a moment. After the meal, we transition from talking about the past Exodus, which is the center of our discussion before the meal, and after the meal, we transition to talk about the hope of the future redemption. What's before the meal is the past. What's following the meal is the future. And we first talk about Jewish redemption. And we sing chunks of the Hallel, like Yivarech et Beit Yisrael. What does that mean? Oh God, Yivarech, which is the future. Bless the house of Israel. Bless the state of Israel. Bless the army of Israel. Bless the people of Israel. Yivarech et Bet Yisrael. That comes after the meal. We're talking about the future. And then from talking about the hope of Jewish redemption, we transition, open your hearts, to talking about the hope of universal redemption. That's right. Why, right after those prayers, we say the prayer of Nishmat Kochai Tivarech et Shimcha Hashem Elokeinu. The breath, the soul of every human being, not just Jews, of every human being will be, we look for the time when every human being will be calling out the name of God. And that prayer is recited in the framework of what is called the Hallel Hagadol, the great Hallel, whose refrain is Ki le'olam chasto, which not only means because God's kindness is eternal, but it means also Ki le'olam chasto. God's kindness is worldly, is universal. It's olam chesed yibaneh. It's not just Israel is based on kindness. The world, if it's going to be redeemed, olam chesed yibaneh. So in effect, when we look at what is happening at the end of the Seder, the last half after the meal, we first talk about Jewish redemption. And Jewish redemption then transition into the hope of universal redemption. And in effect, that movement has us declare and say the following, something that I've been teaching for many decades, that a strong sense of national identity does not contradict universal consciousness, but is a prerequisite to it. I want to say that in different words. A strong sense of ourselves as Jews is not in conflict with our responsibilities as human beings. Our strong sense of our Jewness, if you will, of our peoplehood is, if you will, the forerunner. It is that which allows us to express ourselves in a universal way. Isn't that what Hillel says? Hillel says, Im ein ani li nili. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? We've learned this. If Israel learns anything from the Ukraine is, you can't depend upon anyone else. Israel knows this. Im ein ani li nili. We've got to be for ourselves. But then Hillel says, Ulshani la'atzmi. But if I'm only for myself, more ani. What am I worth? Particularism to universalism. I want to repeat the sentence, that a strong sense of national identity does not contradict our universal responsibilities, but is a prerequisite to it. Now, during these weeks, I have spoken at countless rallies sponsored and attended by Ukrainians. One particular rally, I think the video was sent around, was a rally in front of the White House where 1,000 Ukrainians attended. There were hardly any Jews there. I and Rabbi Eitan Mintz, we were the only two rabbis. And someone asked me to say a few words, and that's what's been sent around. And I stood up and I was so overwhelmed by what was happening. And I cried out, today I am Ukrainian. Today we are all Ukrainian. And I cried those words out based upon what we're talking about now, based upon our worldly responsibility. And there was a pushback. And I want to share with you the pushback. There were many on social media who berated that talk and said, what about past Ukrainian anti-Semitism? I remember the first rally I attended right over here at the Russian Riverdale complex for Ukraine. And it was a rally of our community and the Ukrainian community. I turned to the Ukrainian leader and I said, what's your name? And he said, my name is Bogdan. And I paused and I said, how many times did I remember my father and mother even as a young boy, they would blurt out, and Bogdan Khmelnytsky. I'll bet you remember that, Isaac. Bogdan Khmelnytsky, Yamach Shmo v'zichro. The Bogdan, he was the leader of Gzerotat Fatach. When was it, in the 16th or the 17th century? I said, is your name really Bogdan? He was not Khmelnytsky, but his name was Bogdan. And people wrote, what about Babi Yar? 33,000 Jews were murdered in Babi Yar. And while Yad Vashem has declared that close to 3,000 Ukrainians, they declared to be righteous Gentiles, many thousands more were collaborators with the Nazis. There were more Jews murdered in Ukraine than murdered in Poland. Yes, 3 million Polish Jews were murdered, but many of them, as you know, were taken eastward. And then the Einsatzgruppen, there weren't concentration camps as they were in Poland and in Austria, some in Germany, but they were taken and marched to the east and they were killed in the fields. In Poland, we have some camps that testify to what occurred there. That's why it's so important. We've been battling that those camps be preserved. Shabi was with us a few years ago when we demanded that the church at Auschwitz be moved. In Ukraine, those camps don't exist. And so that pushback is a real pushback. And so what I want to argue is the following, that at the Seder, there may be an opportunity at the Seder to discuss this issue at this point. I've already mentioned to you that after the meal, we move from the particular to the universal, from Yevarech et Beit Yisrael to Nishmat Kol Chai. What is not that well known is that according to some opinions in the Talmud in Psachim, Daf Kuf Yud Chet 118, Rabbi Tarfon, for example, says there's a fifth cup. There's actually a fifth cup of wine. Now, generally in our communities, we don't consume a fifth cup, and the fifth cup really has become the cup of Elijah. But there is a custom that the fifth cup be poured. And Rabbi Tarfon says, when is that fifth cup poured? It's poured right after we finish our discussion about the Jewish redemption. And we're about ready to talk about the big Hallel, the universal Hallel of Kili Olam Chasdo, of Nishmat Kol Chai. All human beings are going to praise God. That's when the fifth cup is poured. And it's actually not an underground position. This is the position of no less an authority as the Rambam, as Maimonides, as the Ravid, as the Sefer Rokeach of the 12th century. We pour that fifth cup. And so I'm wondering whether at that moment, it's a good moment to talk about, it's a good discussion, what are our universal responsibilities? And to put on the table the pasuk from the Decalogue, from the Aseret HaDibrot, where in the 10 Commandments, a better translation is the 10 Declarations, God says, Poked avon avot al banim v'al bnei banim v'al shileshim v'al ribeim l'sonai. God says, I visit my iniquities upon the second generation and the third generation and the fourth generation. It seems as if my critics were correct. The Torah says in the 10 Commandments that God punishes children for the parents. So as we're talking about universal responsibilities, what are our responsibilities to Ukraine? And here I do want to point to an article that our son, Dr. Dov Weiss wrote. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece, which I have in my hand. It was published in a very fancy fancy a periodical called called Religion, I believe, and it's called The Sin of the Parents in Rabbinic and Early Christian Literature. So if you want to read a 40-page paper on it, read Dove. But I always tell Dove, you're the scholar, I'm a rabbi, so I want to give you my take of this. With all my heart and soul, I believe that the consensus and the mainstream and the correct position in Judaism is that we are judged on our own merits. We are not judged by what our parents did or did not do. But what about the sentence, Poked Avon Avot? What about the sentence that God says, I will visit the iniquity of parents upon children? And so there are rabbinic teachings that say that the word poked doesn't mean visit, but it means remembers. You know, the headquarters for understanding a word is the first time it appears in the Torah. And the first time the word pakad in some form appears is when the Torah says, Vadonai pakad et Sarah kasher amar. God remembered Sarah as he had promised, and Sarah became pregnant. So pakad does not mean God visits. It means God remembers. And so, as noted in the Midrash, and it's quoted in the commentary on the Bible by Dr. J.H. Hertz, he understands this sentence this way. Poked Avon Avot, God remembers the sins of fathers and mothers when about ready to punish the children, as God takes into account their evil environment and influence. This is not a statement of the harshness of God, that God takes the sins of the parents and punishes children. Quite the contrary. This is a statement where God tempers justice with mercy. And God says, before I punish a child, I want to consider the parents. Now, in the end, we all have to assume responsibility for whatever we do. The statute of limitation ends, absolutely. I had a good friend, Stuart Harris, of blessed memory, and he was the greatest father in the world. And his children used to pull him to come to their therapy sessions. And Stewie once called me, this is when his kids were already 45 years old. And Stewie calls me and he says, Avi, tell me, my kids pulled me into a therapy session. When does the statute of limitations end? When does the statute of limitations end? Yes, we have to assume responsibility, but this sentence says, before God punishes a child, we're all children, no matter how old we are. God remembers the past. Maybe it wasn't all the child's fault. Or an alternative midrash, which is remarkable, which I have in my hand, another way of understanding it. Here's what the midrash says. I'm reading from from Numbers Rabbah. Kishe'ama lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, poked avon avot al banim. When God said the 10 commandments, when God says to Moshe, I will visit the iniquity of parents on children. Ama Moshe. Moshe enters into dialogue with God. And he says, Ribono shel olam, master of the universe, kama risha'im holidu tzadikim. There were so many wicked people whose children were righteous. Yihiyu notlin me'avonot avihem. Should they be punished for their sins of their parents? And the Midrash proceeds to give examples. Terach oved slamim. Terach was an idol worshiper. The Abraham, and Abraham, his son, was righteous. Should Abraham be punished because of Terach? Or Yoshiyahu? Yoshiyahu was one of the great, great kings, but his father was Ammon from the seed of Menashe, one of the most wicked kings. Should Yoshiyahu be punished because of the sin of Ammon? And then Moshe says to God, he's arguing with God, V'chein no'eh sheyu hatzadikim lokin bavon avihim. And is it correct that the children should be smitten because of the sins of parents? Now open your hearts to an unbelievable, remarkable response. I'm reading it. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, said the Holy One, blessed be he to God, limaditani. Moshe, you are my teacher. You've taught me a good lesson. Chayecha, by your life, she'ani mevatel dvarai. I am going to change my decree, umikayem divorecha, and I will fulfill your words. Shenema. Now, the Decalogue that we read from the Aseret HaDibrot was in Sefer Shmot, was in the book of Exodus. Now we're quoting Devarim, which was said by Moshe. Lo yumtu avot al banim, uvanim lo yumtu al avot. Parents are not punished for their children's sin, nor vice versa. Everyone is judged. We are judged individually by our merits and demerits. And friends, I want you to know that when I stood at these Ukrainian rallies, I felt like I was celebrating in the midst of the reasons why we were there, the beauty of what Torah is. With all my heart and soul, I believe that ethics is not separate from Torah, that God is an ethical God. That's why when we return the Torah to the Ark, we quote the sentence from Mishlei, Dracheha darchei noam, the ways of the Torah are ways of pleasantness. The chol netivoteha shalom, and its paths are paths of peace. And I felt literally that celebration. As one who has been obsessed with Shoah memory, from Bergen-Belsen when Reagan went there to following Trifa around with Dr. Charles Kramer and Waldheim and the Auschwitz convent. Shoah memory is very critical. I've just finished a manuscript called Defending Holocaust Memory. But today, Israel has extraordinary relations with Germany. Now, this was a big discussion in the early 1950s, big discussion. When there was discussion of taking restitution from Germany, Menachem Begin was very, very upset with that. Ben-Gurion disagreed. There was a lot of debate about it. But the mainstream opinion is it's a new generation. And the Bogdan that I met is a new Bogdan. He's not, God forbid, going back centuries to Bogdan Chmelnytsky. And so when speaking at Ukrainian rallies, as I write in this piece, which I'll send to you, I see the moment as an expression of the paths of Torah being darchei noam. I've heard people say to me, Avi, we owe Ukraine nothing. Why do we speak out? Why do we speak out? For me, I hope for you, how can we not speak out? For the sake of our own souls, we must reaffirm the Torah's dictum of lo ta'amod al dam reyecha. Do not stand by idly as the bloods of your brothers and sisters are spilled. And you know, in Jewish law diverges from American law. In most American law, if a person can save somebody who is drowning and doesn't, you have transgressed an ethical norm, but there is no legal violation in most states. In Judaism, if I have the ability to save someone and I do not, it's not just an ethical violation. I could be hauled into a court of law. It's a legal violation. If I hear Kitty Genovese back to the 60s as she's being raped and killed, And as 39 witnesses, that was what the play was called, if you remember, Do Nothing. I am legally culpable, legally responsible. And so that's the third cup. The third cup I call the Kos Olami, the universal cup, that when we get to that Halel Hagadol, to the Kili Olam Chasto, Nishmat Kochai that we spoke about, stop. I think actually you can pour a fifth cup. It's okay. But even if you think that's too radical, symbolically lift the fifth cup. And that's a chance for us to ask the universal question. What are our universal responsibilities, in this case, to Ukraine? What are our responsibilities? And to talk about it within the framework of the key sentence that I've just put forth, is it God visits iniquities of parents upon children, or God remembers the past as a way of softening punishment on the second and third generation? I remember when we were pursuing Kurt Waldheim, and we were in Mauthausen because Pope John Paul II had embraced Kurt Waldheim, and he embraced him and he came to Mauthausen, and together with Bernie Glickman of blessed memory, Joey Brenta was there, others were there. As the Pope's helicopters landed, we picked up signs protesting against the Pope's embrace of Waldheim, an unrepentant Nazi. And this was big news in Austria. And the Austrian federal police, the equivalent of their CIA or the FBI, jumped us and really beat us. And they dragged us into a ravine, down a hill into a ravine. And behind us, they forced us to stand in front of trees. There were about 10 or 11 of us protesting. And we stood in a semicircle, trees behind us. And they were in front of us with these machine guns. They were carrying machine guns. It was a frightening, frightening moment. And suddenly I see coming down the hill, there's an older man. And he comes down the hill and he stands in front of the police, and the police try to shoo him away. And he said, "I'm not leaving." They ask him, "Who are you?" And he says that he is a psychologist, a PhD from Linz. Linz is right near Mauthausen. Now, Linz is a well-known town. Linz is where Otoa Ish, Hitler Yamach Shemo V'Zichro, that's where he grew up in his childhood. He's from Linz. He said, "I am a psychologist in the University of Linz." And he said, "I heard what was going on the radio. And I know what we did 40 years ago. Then it was 40 years ago because this was in 1987. I know what we didn't do during the Shoah. I know that my parents were complicit. I will not make the same mistake. I have seen the children and the grandchildren of those literally who were involved acting differently." And so the third cup, it's the Kos Olami. And finally, the fourth cup. The fourth cup I call the Kos Optimi, the optimistic cup. You know, friends, there's reason to feel despair in these difficult days. Yeah. There's reasons to feel despair. When we think about what's unfolded in Israel, I mean, I just heard a report on BBC, and they talk about how Israel has attacked Palestinians. No mention of, wait a minute, they're responding to terror. No mention. The word terror wasn't even mentioned. These are tough, tough times. They're tough times in Israel. And they're tough times in Ukraine. They're tough times. You know, we protest for a lot of reasons, these rallies about Ukraine. We protest, we want our message to get to Putin. And I'd like to see rabbis and ministers block the Russian Riverdale residents and proclaim we're shutting it down and offer themselves for nonviolent civil disobedience arrest. I'd like to see hundreds of people arrested there. That'll get into the Soviet Union. That'll be heard. That'll be heard. We protest because we want Biden and the Congress to hear our voices that America must do more. I'm not talking about boots on the ground. I'm not even talking about a zone of a fly-free zone, whatever it's called. I'm talking about giving munitions that work, the S-300s, the drones, the anti-missile, the anti-tanks, the anti-guns. And we also cry out because we want our brothers and sisters in Ukraine to hear us. The last rally, there was some people who actually had their phone connected to family members in Ukraine who heard us at this rally. And we also cry out for our own souls, as I said before, just for the health of our own souls. These are times of despair, but the fourth cup is a cup that suggests that by the end of the Seder, we should symbolically raise a cup of optimism. Raise a cup of optimism. In the midst of the despair, to declare what the Hasidic Rebbe's used to say in the toughest of times, Zait nicht miyayesh. Don't despair. Don't give up. I quoted this past Rosh Hashanah, the quote from the great Shimon Peres, who as he got older, even in his 90s, and as they say, getting older is not for sissies, but as he got older, he remained so youthful, so hopeful. And they said to him, how do you do it? And he famously responded, it's one of his famous quotes. He said, optimist and pessimist die the same way. They just live differently. I choose to live as an optimist. Optimist and pessimist die the same way. They just live differently. I choose to live as an optimist. How I remember my dear Ima and Abba at our Seders in Gravesend, Brooklyn, New York, where that U-Haul was parked from today's horror, and we bless the injured that they be healed, and New York City's finest, that this horrific villain be immediately apprehended and no justice. So in the Gravesend section of Brooklyn, we had our Seder. And early in the morning, 2, 3 in the morning, we would end the Seder. And we were all so tired, but at the end of the Seder, and I want to suggest you consider doing this, my father and mother would stand up and they would begin singing Hatikva. And we were too lazy to stand up. They would say, come, stand up, out of respect for Hatikva. Now you have to remember, as many of you know, my father was raised in the town of Oshvenchim. 45% of that town was Jewish. Before it became Auschwitz, the town in which my father was raised, after he left, thank God, became the Auschwitz death camp. And my father was raised in a Hasidic home. We are very strong Bavava Hasidim. My father was a little boy, he had peyot. But he would tell us that even as a young boy, he had peyot. And even though the Bavav are good, wonderful people, but they weren't great Zionists. My father got involved in the Shoma Hadati. My father got involved and he was a Zionist. And he said, even as a little boy, he didn't want to disrespect his father, who didn't want to have anything to do with it. But even as a little boy, he used to stand with friends, 8, 9 years old, and he would sing in the midst of what they were experiencing, Od lo avda tikvatenu, hatikva shnot alpayim. Our hope is not lost. So these are overwhelming times. And at our Seder, though I'm suggesting we raise 4 cups, just as a summary. The first cup is the cup empathy. We begin the Seder by pouring Miriam's cup of water. And remember those in the Ukraine who have no water. And let this set a framework to empathize for all that is unfolding there. And then the second cup, which we called Kos She'ela, the cup of question. The cup of question, which we integrate with the second cup of wine that we pour. And we say, all those who are hungry, come in. Yeah? After you say it, or as you say it, open the door. Are we real? Do we want our guests to come in? Have we opened the door to do whatever we can, and everyone has the capacity to do something for Ukraine? Are we asking the right questions? And go around the table and have people ask questions, even questions that don't have to be answered. 90% of an answer is the question. The main thing is for the questions. And then the third cup. And the third cup is the cup after the meal. It's the fifth cup, if you will. It's that universal cup, the Kos Olami, before we say Nishmat Kol Chai Ki Le'olam Chasto. What are our universal responsibilities? It's a very, very deep, deep question that we have to ask, that our kids are asking very much. Kids on campus are asking questions about Israel and Ukraine. What are our universal responsibilities? And try at the Seder never to get into deep disagreements. It has to be to disagree agreeably. It has to be a conversation in which we're really listening to each other. Talking means not only that I'm talking, but I'm hearing others talk and hearing them say things that I may not agree with, but I want to listen to it. That's the third cup, the universal cup. What are our responsibilities considering the Ukrainian past? And our last cup is at the end of the Seder to symbolically lift the cup. And this is the Kos Optimi. It's the optimistic Kos. To lift it, literally to lift it behaviorally. Maybe from the behavior, the hearts are pulled after the action to lift the cup and to say, Yiyatov, it's going to be good. God willing, with God's help, with our help, we will overcome and move forward to lift these cups so that they become a together cup of redemption, a kos of Geulah. I want to stop here. And we have a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, just to offer if you have any questions. But I want to begin by asking my dear friends, Bev and Ted. Ted, if you have any questions you can help me with, or Bev, any thoughts, any questions? Because Ted was on this morning and I failed to see Ted's hand. So Ted, do you have any thoughts on this, my dear, dear Ted? Just go off mute, okay?
First of all, and one of the issues that we as Jews and the whole world should think about is the universal nature of fickleness. I hear so much Ukraine, 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 rightly so. But what about what the Afghans are all about? You don't hear a word about it anymore. It's no longer top news. And so I think if we're going to keep the Ukrainians in mind, it doesn't mean we have to forget other suffering people. And I mentioned the Afghans because they were the just previous news item. and I don't hear a word about them anymore.
Ted,
Secondly, and this is a very minor point, but it comes under the category of one person's poison is another one's meat. And I'm referring to the beginning of the Seder, where you say this is the bread of affliction. Well, maybe it was then, but it certainly is now, because not now, because you have the option of at least the majority of the year to eat it or not, or in fact, it may be a delicacy. I know I love matzah. I have it 365 days of the year
That's supposed
for
to.
breakfast, and matzahs and coffee. So a lot of the things that are said as, absolute issues are open to question.
I appreciate that so much, Ted. And I have been asking myself, if permit me just a personal thought, that I've become very involved in the Ukrainian issue and developed close relationship with Ukrainian clergy, which for me is actually, I mean, I remember going back when we were pursuing Trifa, we took over the offices of the Romanian Orthodox Church of America out in Long Island. And when I saw the Ukrainian Orthodox, there's Ukrainian Catholic and then there's Ukrainian Orthodox. When I saw them at the Washington rally and my hands were around them, I said, oh, wow, that was, it was like, and they're actually in history, there's not, even now, there's not much difference between the Romanian Orthodox and Ukrainian Orthodox, and the Romanian Orthodox were the ones who were protecting Trifa. But permit me just a personal thought. Having become involved in this issue, and I'm closer to 80 now than I am to 75. I'm not a kid anymore. And getting out to these rallies. Yesterday, we were at a rally at the Israeli Mission. It's it's a bit more challenging, but I think the question you ask is a fair one. Why? I'm asking myself. I cared about, there were horrors unfolding in Africa, where there were in Rwanda, there were massacres, what's happening in China, there were Muslims who are innocent, who are really, they're being challenged, their lives are being threatened. And, I cared about it, but not on the same level. And I think the Seder is a time to ask those questions, and we should try not to be defensive. We should try to ask the questions, learn from it, and hopefully grow from it. And you're right about the bread of affliction. We don't say this is, we say this is like the bread of affliction. Because for many of us, we have the matzah to eat with our coffee or whatever. But we're trying to imagine this is like the bread of affliction of the past people who were afflicted, or contemporary times. But thank you, Ted, and please, anyone else?
I'd like to say a word.
Sure. And then Ronnie, you're up after.
How has Ukraine voted in the UN with regard to Israel?
Not good.
Not good. So as much as things change, there's a lot that remains the same.
Okay.
And we have to be aware of it. And
yes.
That's part of the answer. What can we expect from the Ukraine in the future, having set up field hospitals all over and given so much to them?
Yes.
What can we expect for the future?
Yeah. It's a fair.
Will they feel that they are in some sense obligated, if not to their past, to their present, which remains to be seen?
Yeah. I'm dreaming of a world where we don't think about our obligations to the politics of the world or the economics of the world. I don't want to sound self-righteous. Lord knows I come up so short. But what about our obligations to doing what's right? Doing what's right. And I love Israel with all my heart and soul. But Israel's becoming a big country, a strong country. And these are issues that I think in a country that's open. I hear what you're saying, Beverly. And the Ukrainians' record on voting for Israel is not a good record. But the question I ask is, okay, where does that take me? Does that mean I don't speak out? I do speak out. Am I speaking out on condition that I'm going to get a return favor? Or I'm speaking out because it's the right thing to do? You know, and these are hard questions, granted. Ronnie, did you want to say something?
Not necessarily, but you're pushing me. So I'll just say, first of all, it is so wonderful. And I hope I'm not overstepping if I say that I'm speaking for others on this Zoom call, to just hear you teach, Rabbi. These past 2 years have been so challenging for everyone. And I certainly have felt a terrible sense of loss, of void in not being able to benefit from your Torah. So this was a wonderful hour and a half to just be in your sphere and learning from you. It's wonderful. May Cain Yirbu, as they say in our family, may it continue. And you give us tremendous food for thought, as it were, as we move into Pesach. And what I love is that you've raised the challenging points, and now it's up to us to grapple with it and see how we're going to approach it. So
Right.
anyway, as
And
usual,
I have to grapple with that too, to see how our kids would handle it. I don't know. You know, when it's one thing, the older I get, the more I realize I don't have the answers. And that's a good thing. I have the questions. And if none of this resonated, I put out there that we should be asking ourselves, do we have some responsibility to talk about what's happening? We certainly in Israel, I think people will. And I just wonder about that. So Ronnie, thank you for those sweet words. Anybody else have some thoughts?
I
Yeah,
second whatever
please.
Ronnie said.
We have a guest here who
Rabbi Weiss is next door.
you can take off that.
Well,
And on the
Introduce
screen.
yourself.
my name's Gary Baggy, and I'm Rabbi Weiss's next door neighbor.
Speak up.
But I had a couple of, I'm from Florida most of the year, so I'm not usually here. I just arrived today actually with my wife. But I had a couple of thoughts that might be interesting and intriguing. It occurred to me yesterday that I was thinking about Ukraine, and I was thinking about the Pesach Seder, and I realized I eat grain on the Pesach Seder. And the word "u" in Hebrew means and grain, which means and the bitterness is going on. Ukraine.
I actually, so in other words, what you're saying, it sounds like Ukraine.
Ukraine, but I'm saying Ukraine. And it occurred to me, I just, I sent an email to my friend about that. So we should think about that. The other thought that I had is that Zelensky represents to me in my thoughts, when you mention Eliyahu Hanavi, there's a tradition in Kabbalah, I believe, and I'm not a Kabbalist, so please don't take me for that at all. But I heard that if Pinchas evolved into Nadav and Avihu, and Nadav and Avihu sort of attached himself to Eliyahu Hanavi, and these were zealots. And eventually the zealot became constructive in the soul of Eliyahu Hanavi, and something incredible occurred. And when I see Zelensky, he appears to me to be one of the most outstanding zealots of the century, from what I could see. And it doesn't come as a surprise to me, perhaps, that maybe in some way Hashem is teaching us, the free world, what it means to be somewhat of a zealot in times where democracy is losing its edge all over the world, as well as in the United States. that he's speaking to us as a zealot. And maybe we need to really understand that and take it to heart. And he's confronting the United States. And keep in mind some things that we don't talk about very much, is Ukraine had to give up their nuclear weapons at some point, at the behest of the United States, by the way. That doesn't get talked about on the
Yes.
news stations. And how do we come to terms with that? We're not only part of the solution, we were part of the problem. And there was a program, I think it's called Storm and Fire, that demonstrated what was going on in 2014 in Kiev and in the Donbass region, and exactly the cruelty that was going on that the Russians were perpetrating. I don't know how much that resonated in the world. It sounded to me like the world was sleeping, even back then.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Arnie, you must have something to say, Arnie. Shavi, any thoughts, Shavi?
I will hand the torch over to Arnie. Bekavod.
But I do want to ask you, Shavi, how young folks, your friends, would relate to this, whether this is just, and he's Arnie, please, my Arnie.
So, first of all, to Ted's point, the fickle nature of the universal, I think, was never clearer than in the Holocaust, when we, the Jewish people in Europe, couldn't imagine that this could happen as it was unfolding. I also think, Avi, I've said this before to you in many occasions. I love when you teach, because it makes me feel, and I'm sure it makes others feel, that the ideal is actually possible. But in many cases, what's unfolding now, at what point will Ukraine get enough help that it won't be a country destroyed, its people gone, or at least many or most of them, its buildings in ruin, maybe its independence gone forever? We don't know how this will unfold, but right now, I think the practical, if I were a betting man, I would bet on the practical rather than the optimistic people, unfortunately. And my last thought is that, having just said that, the piece of me that's idealistic thinks that maybe Zelensky was put in this position. Maybe his Jewish identity will come out as needed. Like in your favorite line from the Megillah, maybe this is why he was a comedian, becomes the prime minister, and he's Jewish, no less. And here he is, he's already talking about the Ukraine being a big Israel when this is all over. So who knows?
There's been pushback on Zelensky too, because his children, I believe, have been baptized and all of that. But for me, and this has been my rabbinate, he's born a Jew. And Yisrael, no matter what, he has a pinta l'yid, and I'm very proud that he's a Jew. And just on a very personal level, all my life, all my rabbinate, it's been a rabbinate of never again. I was born in 1944 at the end of the Shoah, and with people so beyond me, Yaakov Birnbaum, Glenn Richter, these are greats of the greats. And we said never again. Meir Kahana said never again, that we would never allow something like this to happen again. And here, we're seeing something happen again. We're seeing the horror unfold, not to Am Yisrael, but we're seeing the horror unfold, and it's happening. And to this point, Putin's getting away with it, even though he's a war criminal. I wish somebody would take him out. I wish there'd be some hero within the Kremlin that would do it. So it's on some level, it's very depressing to see something like this happen. And so far we've not had the capacity. He's not been stopped. But Arnie, notwithstanding it, and the reality, and I hear you say the reality, we're here because Am Yisrael is, we don't only deal with reality, we deal with levels of continuity that are inexplicable. It's hard to explain. I realize Ukraine is not Israel, but I'd like to think that it's that which is going to win out. That even though the reality is, it seems that everything is stacked against the Ukrainians, I'd like to think that that they will remain, and that the Russians will be defeated. I'd like to think that. Who knows? But these are the kinds of discussions I think we need. We'll just take one. Shabi, do
I'd
you want
like
to
to
say a
say
word
something.
about? Yeah, please, of course.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Danny.
you mentioned Pakad, meaning remembering and visiting. And maybe we can combine the two with this thought, with the belief in Gilgal Nefesh. It says that God will visit or remember in the third or fourth generation. Why third or fourth? Why not just one? Because the great-grandfather comes back in the third or fourth generation. And then he can remember the past, or we can remember, God can remember his past, but this child has the opportunity to do tshuva and to, in another life, do better, or repeat the same mistake, and then the sins of the father is visited upon that child who came back and repeated the same mistake. But he also can do tshuva and not be like the parents. So maybe in Ukraine, we have people of both stripes.
Right. I also want to draw everybody's attention, if you have a moment, to take a look at the prophet Yechezkel. Yechezkel, it's, I believe, chapter 18. Somebody has it. I don't have it here. If you look at the first sentences, Yechezkel pronounces very, very clearly that reward and punishment is not based on what occurred in the past. So it just seems, scholars would say that God said God visits, and then Moshe challenges and God evolves. I'm more of a traditionalist. I actually think that God always meant parents would never be punished, that his children would never be punished for sins of parents, but he presents it in such a way that he wants Moshe to challenge them. That's the great teacher. God is the ultimate, because he wants the thinking, he wants it to come from Moshe. He wants that concept that Ishbecheto Yumat, that come from Moshe himself. I think we've been at this for a while. And Rivka, do you have any thoughts? Anyone? Anybody? Helene? Anyone? Sue?
Rabbi Weiss?
Yes.
Yeah, I just, the question about Afghanistan and
Ted's question. Yes.
that he said, why are we missing Afghanistan? And, we could go back to Darfur. There's a lot of times when genocide has come into place. And I think we are guilty of not standing up and doing something. But this, to me, has a very special connection with the Holocaust, because the Russians are bringing crematoriums with them to get rid of the bodies. And if we don't stop them with Ukraine, they're gonna not stop at Ukraine. So selfishly, we need to stop them at Ukraine, because if not, you got Poland, Finland. It's, you don't know where this can go. And Russia only understands strength. And if you show weakness, it's going to be a catastrophe. I think one of the reasons why this has happened is because what we did in Afghanistan. And we did not keep our promise.
Could very well be.
And the promise was made by not only the United States, but Russia itself, with Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons. That was a promise made by Russia and the United States and NATO. And I think we're fulfilling our duties. And they have a Jewish president, and they do business with Israel. They do a tremendous skip of business with Israel, so they are very friendly to Israel. I don't know about what I judge by their actions now, not the past. Because if I were to judge the past with any of my friends or even my father and my mother, we all have made mistakes. And it just, we have for me personally, we have a very strong commitment to support them, because if no one comes for them, who's going to come for us?
Mhm. First, Bruce, it's so good to see you. We go back decades, Bruce, and just want to
Half a
bless you.
century.
Half a century, that far. I just want to bless everyone with a Chag Sameach. And Shabi, do you want to say a final word?
Can I
Uh,
ask something?
Oh, I think someone else would.
Okay.
I think Bracha wants to say something.
Oh, please, Bracha.
Yeah, I love the emphasis on questions. And as I'm looking at it, as I'm thinking about questions, every important person in Judaism, starting with Abraham and then even Moshe, who was so humble, asked God questions, did not hold back from doing that. So we have a direction in which to proceed in terms of important issues in life and in the world. And if you look at the word She'elah, right in the center of it is the name of God. So it's almost like we're impelled to ask questions, that it's a godly thing to do.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Bracha. That's a blessing question. Beautiful. I think, Shabi, you have the last word. Shabi.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. I'll just say that a lot has happened in the 2 years since this virtual community began, and whether you, Ravavi, have been speaking about Black Lives Matter, or the Ukrainian crisis, or crises in faith and spirituality, whether it be Pesach or Purim or Rosh Hashanah or Tisha B'Av, it's just very comforting, and it's very gratifying to know that I'm part of this community and that we have this shared space where we can all come together to reflect, to learn, to hear, to grow, and I'm very, very grateful, and I'm really honored in a way that I can learn so much from each of you, from your stories, from your comments, from your life. And again, whatever the next few weeks, the next few months, the next year brings, we will have this sense of community. And so for that, I'm very grateful.
Shabi, you mean so much to me, Shabi. I hope you know how much. And as a matter of fact, I heard someone sent me a beautiful video. You were leading a demonstration. I think it was of NYU students. Was it, Shabi? And you told a beautiful story. Could you tell that it's a beautiful story? That would be a great way to bring this to a close. It's a beautiful story.
If this is the story that I hope it's the same one.
Repeat it, but please, I want to hear it from you.
Sure. So the story goes that, oops, let me add me. The story goes that there was a pacifist pastor by the name of A.J. Milne, I believe. And it was during the height of the Vietnam War. And he was leading what was essentially a one-man vigil outside the White House. He would come, he would chant for a few minutes, he would sing, and then he would basically just stand there for hours on end in the cold, in the snow, in the rain, you name it, he was there. And eventually a reporter comes up to him and says, you know, what are you doing? You're just one man. You're by yourself. No one's listening to you. And the reporter says, how do you expect to change the world? And so the pastor looks at the reporter without missing a beat and says, I'm not here to change the world. I'm here so the world doesn't change me. And yeah, I think whether in the past few weeks, as Ravavi mentioned, I've been able to help out a little on the Ukrainian border, and I've been able to go with Ravavi to Poland to raise a voice of Jewish and moral outrage and unity. And something that really has kept me going throughout all this time has been to the world, you're just one person, but to one person, you're the whole world. And we can each make a difference in our own unique and our own small way.
So just thank you. It's a beautiful story. I don't want the world to change me. It's a beautiful story. There's a niggin that I wrote to Sos Tassis. It's about the hope of Zion, redeemed, renewed. It's a bracha from the Shiva Brachot. Bam, 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 ba-di-da-da, bam, 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 ha-la-li-da-la, hi-da-hi-da-hi-da, ha-li-da-da, ha-li-da-li-da-da. So, to-o-sis, ve-ta-ge, ha-akara, ve-vi-put, ba-anea, ve-to-fa-bis-ta. Lishana Hazak, Bishalayim Lishana Hazak, Bishalayim Lishana Hazak, Bishalayim Hallelujah. Am Yisrael, Chai V'Yichle, Am Yisrael, Chai V'Yichle, Am Yisrael, Chai V'Yichle, na 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 bo wanu aw wato aw shem bisameya si ya bevane hanai ai nai nai ai nai nai ai nai nai ai nai nai na hi na ni na 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 ni na 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 Chag Sameach to everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.